I'd like to call this meeting to order, and if you could kindly call the roll.
Sure. John Henry Randolph.
Here.
Scott Barris.
Here.
Jeff Morris. David Henry. Oops, you're joining us online. See him right now. Edward Ullman.
Here.
Bree Fields.
Here.
Ian Bush.
Here.
Julie Thomas. Here. Martin Comments.
Here,
Okay, so
and
we
David Henry has joined.
Oh, great.
Here, thank you.
All right, so we have 8 members in attendance and a quorum.
Okay, this meeting today is solely administrative business, so we don't have to introduce any evidence in this record. And I think the first item on the agenda is the CEO prioritization list.
Yes. So this list, we're just keep moving on this list and some amendments. I'll provide a little bit of updates on this. So item number 1 is the actually first item that we have under our discussion topics for administrative portion. Item number 2, we have a text amendment pending that's going to the county commissioners on Thursday. We've removed item 3 items. Let's see, the next item that we've done is item number 7 is also part of a text amendment that's going on Thursday. Item number 8 is tangentially related to the item that you'll hear tonight, as well as item number 9. And then items 13 and 14 have been completed. So we are making good progress. Just want to keep everyone updated, and we'll continue to review this at the ordinance review committee and make sure that we're hitting the next items appropriately and combining them or separating them as needed.
Okay, that sounds great. So then tonight, to follow this prioritization list, we have the unfinished business of, or we have the discussion item of ZOA-25-3, and that's the amendment to the county development ordinance concerning items 1 and 9 from the CEO prioritization list. Do you want to review those with us?
And before we get started on that, I might just share one thing.
Yes.
There was a discussion at one of the ordinance review committees that before this item come to the ordinance review committee next, or the plan commission, that we look at a housing inventory. So we have substantially drafted a housing inventory option. We've presented it to the ordinance review committee, but I'd like to present it here tonight just to get some feedback. So what we've done so far is we created a survey that then feeds into a map. On the legend here, you have an orange. It says it's a
Screen. Did we have?
Everyone else was seeing it.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So on the screen here, we have orange dots, being that they've received a site plan development or secondary plat approval. The green dots mean that they actually are at the stage of building permits. And then the purple dots are just preliminary approvals, such as rezones or primary plat approvals. Now, we've put together, with the help of our surveyor's office, a dashboard just to give you a preview. So we took like 12 different items that were very varied in size and location, just to first get some data in here to see how it would work. So for instance, when you pull this up, it will give you the address. It will say how many lots are platted. So this one is 3 lots. Minimum lot size, 2.5 acres, number of buildings. So it gives you some related case file numbers and year approved 2023. So this model is a little bit, this is probably the best we can do, but it is challenging when you're dealing with rural small subdivisions all the way to like really dense multifamily housing. So we tried to create some lateral comparisons, such as units per acre. So for instance, Westgate has 9.8 units per acre. So it's much denser than, say, a minor subdivision, which has 0.4 units per acre. So I will share this with the plan commission. I meant to put it on the agenda, it went to ordinance review committee and it slipped my mind for this packet. But I will make this available, and then what we're hoping to get is some feedback before we put in any further data, just to make sure we're on the right track.
Excellent. I look forward to seeing that. Where will that be available? Will you send it to us by email?
I can send it to you by email. I don't necessarily want to publish it yet because it's not full
Yeah, right.
information. But it is a good start. It's public information. So how about I send it by email for now?
That sounds good.
And then once we get a more solid version, I'll put it on the CDO website.
That sounds really.
So this gives us, this provides that, that meeting, but ORC meeting, but, so this gives information about what's in the hopper, in other words, what's coming. So then we still don't have the other side of this, which is existing units.
So what we could do, so we do have. So yeah, in order to understand like where things are at in the process, it could be the same project that gets updated from an orange dot or a purple
Yeah.
dot to a green dot.
Yeah.
But I think that we have all of the data for building permits that we could upload as just another layer. I'll just say, here's all the building permits. If you wanted that information. Now,
Right.
I wasn't sure if I think the scope was 5 years, city, county, Ellettsville.
Right.
And there was more of a thought process that we would look at approve subdivisions, approve rezones, like
Right.
kind of more in the purple or orange dot category. But at this juncture, because it's now 2025, some of those dots have moved to
Right.
orange.
Right.
Yeah.
So it'd be good to figure out a way to automatically update that if that was possible. I don't know.
And for me, the map is nice, but a spreadsheet, if it has the information, is, is very useful, that especially because this takes a lot of work and a lot of updating, a lot of under the hood type of stuff. Whereas if it's a spreadsheet, with a number of units, et cetera, that, and we get it from the city, we get city information as well on apartments. Yes, Candy?
I mean, the survey, I don't know if you have access to it. We can pull this data straight out of OpenGov, I believe,
Yeah.
was what Jackie was saying.
And it should be able to be made into a spreadsheet.
But the city and Ellettsville, that's a hand entered
Right.
survey.
Right,
How much of their staff is really gonna participate in
Right.
that is.
right, right. I don't
It's a
anticipate
huge
it will.
area, so we can figure that
Yeah.
out. We can retrofit it. Sorry, Scott.
So I used to run 2 analysis divisions. And so my point is here is that the report generation portion of this feature, which you may or may not have at this point, we should be able to find the type of reports that we're interested in seeing. And then being able to go and put that into a spreadsheet or another doc, something like that, so we can visually see that in front of us.
Yeah, so
Do
if
you mind
people.
if I field that question, just with my experience of Pro, this filled out in Esri. Like right now, she's showing what's called a table of attributes. That's pretty similar to an Excel. This data can be then put onto Arc Pro, and it could be exported in a multitude of different ways of reporting. It could be very customized. It can even have maps with the geography for the points are part of the report. There's a lot of dynamic capabilities to this. Sorry, Jackie, I was just if that's the direction, there's a team in the surveyor's office in the GIS division that can help assist planning, but they already have a pretty good group of experts in there too, so.
And the bells and whistles are nice, but they distract from just the raw number of units, and I feel that the report and the map, we need to fully vet privacy issues and things like that, I think that a spreadsheet and a list for an inventory is what I'm looking for. I need a list and
I want the big picture.
I want how
I
many.
don't want 19 lines of data. I want to be able to drill it back up. And I
Like
want-
what?
I don't know, but that's what I don't know what I don't know at this point. But I need to be able to take and condense it and make it clear and succinct.
You
And
want a summary Margaret's looking for detail, you're looking for
I'm looking for
a summary of this is how many housing units are still.
And
planned.
then you can do a trend analysis, those sort of things determine.
Yeah,
That's all I,
they're both valuable pieces of information. Should be able to
But
pull.
we can tally those by year, you know, if the data is in a spreadsheet and a list, we can
Right.
tally those and just doing a sum. But as long as the unit is defined and standardized.
Right, but that, the data that's in the map can be moved into a spreadsheet.
I think but the reverse is also true. The spreadsheet has to be correct. The map is a bell and a whistle. You know, I just feel that the spreadsheet has to be correct and we should be focusing on the spreadsheet. How many units do we have at a certain, in a certain development? At a certain address, rather than,
I think they're mutually exclusive. I think the map shows the spreadsheet and the spreadsheet is the data being displayed. They're not really separated unless we're using a different type of format with Esri products. If it has a spatial location, if you have dates and things like that, you could do a spatial report of from this year to that year. If you wanted to exclude everything from the city, you could do just the county. You could even exclude things from Ellettsville if we're even tracking. I'm just saying you could do spatial reports. They're mutually exclusive in here. The report is the spreadsheet, or the map is the spreadsheet.
with, that's the right word, mutually exclusive. I think they're interlinked and interdependent. Not exclusive
Yeah.
of
Yeah,
each other.
yeah,
but
sorry. Yeah,
interlinked and
I'm
interdependent.
They're not mutually
I
exclusive.
picked up on
Sorry.
that, yeah.
This is a template.
for you guys.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's a public, we have a public notice map where we show on the map where all the petitions are coming up.
Right.
So tying it geographically is always helpful for the public.
I think there's a use for both.
Okay.
Okay,
If we do the spreadsheet, the nice thing about this is that this is just a template. I will just do the spreadsheet and it just populates the map. I don't have to do anything else.
I do.
But I do want to make sure that the columns of data we're filling out is what you're looking for.
And
Because if that's
that's-
wrong, yeah, exactly. If that's wrong, then the map is.
Yeah.
Where's all the data being pulled from?
A variety, a variety of
Okay, but-
sources. Yeah.
But is it being housed in a database in Esri, or is it coming from a variety of different places? Because if you had it in one central repository, then you can make your reports.
So the data is
See what you want.
stored on the server in our SDE, and then they're pulled from different databases. Some of it, if we have parcel data, could be a combination of our LAO software in the auditor's office or our CAMA in our assessor's office. Also, planning has data sets that's stored in our SDE. If anything's stored on Esri, that would be like a live atlas, which might be kind of the background map, some road layers, but everything, as I know, is stored internal or on ATO, which is maintained by us. So that's kind of a cloud, but still a separate way for us to upload data, publish data, and then it's kind of stored on the ATO environment. But we have a portal, so with the portal, it's stored on our servers, hosted on an online environment that creates services that can be fed into these various different maps. So it's a consortment of data.
Yeah, so I think that what he's asking is, a lot of the data comes from the building department. Yeah, and it also comes from our plan commission packets and from the commissioner packets, because things are in various states of completion. And so we have what was approved, whether or not there have been amendments, et cetera. So we, you know, it comes from a variety of sources.
Make it, I think you're also getting at the point of how do we make this more sustainable, maybe on the long run, how do we add those questions that are built in the beginning? And that's why I go back to, it's really challenging to compare rural type subdivisions in the same spreadsheet as a multifamily development, because those questions, how many beds are in a rural 4-lot subdivision, it just doesn't make sense. But in a more urban environment, it does. So we wouldn't be asking those questions in that spreadsheet to combine the two.
This is going for you, Tron, because if you have to educate. we have multitude of databases. Right. Okay, and are there a multitude of portals? There's just one portal access databases. It pulls that data and relates.
There's multitude databases, which then there's scripts that pull that data, that house it, then we publish it up. But what planning is doing right now may not be that in-depth or dynamic, like Jackie's saying, she's building out a template, so I could directly answer your question, but that might not be directly related to what Jackie's showing us. So we pull those datas and then when we publish them and post them. But if you're talking about like a beacon site, they got a connection where they just actually run a script nightly and pull that nightly. So that's not hosted on our board.
So
If that makes sense.
It does.
Okay.
I'm concerned about one basic premise, because when I did the housing inventory, the unit of measure was diverse, like the city measured things by bedroom, and we measured things by house. Yep. And we don't rent by the bed. And so I had to call every apartment complex and get from them, how many apartments do you have? Because the city is renting them by the bedroom. For comparability, if we have the bedroom data, fine. But I want the unit data, because those properties were approved as multifamily units. And the number of bedrooms concerns us less than how many multifamily units they have in Echo Park, or how many multifamily units they have in Evolve, right? So that we have comparability.
So luckily for the PUDs that we have that I added in here, we had both unit count and bedroom count, but I definitely agree over time, it's going to be more and more challenging for us to look at it by bedrooms.
Yes.
It's just not something that we typically.
Oh my God.
Stated. So
Crazy.
this is county data, so like I have this is the Westgate project, for instance. This is based on their latest amendment where they switched the first floor commercial.
Yeah.
So 371 units, 511 beds, but
We don't care about the beds.
Yeah, I think units is fine. I think units is fine. I think the problem is getting into bedroom counts is difficult, because while it is a record at the assessor's office, that is not always accurate anyway.
Exactly.
So, but I do think the one thing I thought of as you were talking is, I think it will also be important to count ADUs and DADUs as well. And I don't know that that's part of, they're so recent, but in terms of usage, but I think it will be important to add that as a living space, because you wouldn't build it unless you were renting or using it.
They can do it by right.
they can do it by right, so we'd only be getting building
don't-
permits.
We do, yeah, but the building permits would be there, right?
Want the permit numbers.
Yeah.
So that- Yeah, we could put in building permit numbers. It's just gonna start to look really busy.
Oh, yeah, no, I guess I'm thinking in terms of, I would really like to know how many have been built.
Yeah.
Sure, okay.
I mean, those are housing units.
Yeah.
I would love to know if 10 have been built or 100 or 1,000.
But somewhere in between.
Yeah, I think it's between 100 and 1,000, but
And
I mean, there are things like that increased affordability of housing, increased housing options. And I don't think we should forget.
Okay, so as far as that's concerned, that
Doesn't have to be
the
that.
standardized unit of comparison is really important to me.
Yeah.
And so ADUs and DADUs should be separate too. And those should be defined so that they can be comparable between the city and the county, and within a county and within the city. So a detached accessory dwelling unit and a detached dwelling unit. I mean, isn't that like a home expansion?
An accessory dwelling unit is attached,
So-
but detached is separate.
But isn't that just an enlargement of a home? I mean,
Not necessarily,
It says separate entrance.
it's, yeah, separate, it's entirely separate. entity.
so then that turns a single family home into a dual family home
Right,
or a multi-family
potentially.
home. So, so then the unit of measurement on that block becomes a multifamily home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I think,
True.
I
A
will, I think I'll give you all the spreadsheet because it also has the list of options. So I'll
Yes.
send you the survey and the list of options too.
What do you call it?
Housing inventory.
Housing. Thank you very much.
Because I know it shouldn't be too hard for you to extrapolate data off GIS, but would it be possible to add? And maybe I missed it as you scroll through the columns, but add a column on what the zone is for that line item. And then perhaps if it had to go through a rezone to get to that,
I guess good.
what the previous zone. And if I'm not being too much, if it would be possible on like what, just maybe on a percentage, like what's the most dominant neighboring zone? Like-
So prior zone's gonna be a little bit of a challenge, just in the CDO map. So do you want all of the prior zoning from the? Or do
You
you
could-
want,
you could
or do
ditch
you want
prior
just
zone.
petitions from the
You could
public?
ditch prior zone if needed.
Okay.
Too much of a challenge. I just would like to know if it went through a rezone in the process of being subdivided.
Okay.
But, and then I'm just curious on like neighboring zoning.
So rezone required, current zoning, and then do you have anything else? If not prior zoning, because prior zoning is gonna get a little challenging.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Yeah, we can ditch
Okay.
prior zoning, unless
So, okay.
unless you have that data easily attainable, don't worry about it. But I just would also be really interested in like
But there's.
neighboring zoning.
You weren't that
Depicted on the map?
It doesn't need to be depicted on the map, but I mean, it
Well,
could
you
be
got a
added.
better way to do it. We just usually add the layer of the zoning, but still, whereas I think if you have a column
Not
in my spreadsheet and you're gonna have maybe 5 different zones that are surrounding that thing.
Well, that's why I was just
And
saying.
that's
the
harder, I
majority.
think, for us
I was just requesting the majority, like,
and that's more of a visual, I think visual things. So you're do.
I'm one that all my layers always had way too many columns because I like to be able to just extrapolate a spreadsheet and go from there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but it's, I don't know, I just think it would be valuable for my understanding of, at least for me personal, what's neighboring, what's adjacent.
Okay.
And how, if it had to go through a rezone to get to that.
Okay, does anybody else have any constructive comments for Jackie and Tammy on this?
I don't know if mine were constructive, I just feel like I did work.
Just feel compelled to say that to Edward's point, I think a zoning map would be good. I think maybe thinking moving forward, putting in some type of versioning with the zoning layer will track as things are changed, what they were previously. So as we move forward, that data could be there and then incorporating kind of the zoning map. There might be a way to kind of highlight like, hey, which one adjacent to us is the majority zone, but I don't know if there's a tool or something.
You can have a slider with the timeline, you know, if they put in the year for the zone, you can have a slider bar, but that's a lot of information they've got to load in, and I think it gets in the way. I mean, that could be added on later, but as far as having an inventory, that's priority
That's the
number
key.
one.
Yep.
And that's what I'm getting at. Some of this is automated, so it'd be a less of a manual lift for
But-
planning if they wanted to move in that direction.
Yeah, the zoning, you know, if it's associated with year, eventually, like 5 years down the road, a slider bar could be installed and you can see the zoning change over time.
Is this all doable?
Yeah, that's doable.
These changes are doable. I think I haven't dug into the city data, so I appreciate Margaret's comment about standardizing the data. I don't know how Ellisville's data will be, honestly. Keeping it up will be challenging, just even in the time period that we started this to now. I
Yeah.
could see one moving to building permit.
Yep.
And it's, you know, the color coding is helpful in a way, but like Westgate's a good example where about half of the project is underway. And so
Right.
Southern Meadows, half the project's underway. So I'm kind of getting a sense that some people have different interests in the data. So it sounds like some of housing units. And maybe also geographic location of that information. And then just like the process to get there, the timeline to get there.
Is there any? I'm just trying to make your life easier, not harder, believe it or not. Is there any way that the data can just be moved into that data set without you having to, or maybe just.
For county.
Yeah, for the county, we could. Okay.
City could be the building permits still get
Right.
caught, but
Okay.
Ellisville would not be.
Yeah. But then we are missing a piece still, especially with the city in terms of vacancies in apartments.
That's gonna be really,
That one, I don't even know how we're gonna, how that gets done, and that's not your worry, it's like something I just keep hearing that rate is like 60%, 50% in a lot of the new apartments, and how do they do it?
well, they overbuilt.
Yeah, I don't know how. I don't know how anybody does that. But anyway,
But Tammy had a question or a comment. You had your.
It was very much tied to the Ellisville and city of Bloomington and how do we get them to
Yeah.
fill out those surveys?
I don't
Yeah.
think we asked them to fill out the surveys because the
yeah,
hand information was inaccurate.
I know how to.
And also distorted in terms of the metrics they were
Yes.
collecting. So I've provided some backbone that you can go validate and verify. And with the building department, they're the ones who know. And they're the ones with the standardized unit, and sometimes in the file, it's just the back of an envelope.
yeah,
With the number of units that they're talking about. And then where there was discrepancy, I reconciled it by calling the owner of the apartment building. And asked about their units, what about what's first floor? Is that commercial space being changed and converted into bedrooms? How many units do you have? And vacancies are proprietary.
Yep.
Information, so focus less on vacancy.
Yep.
And I would like to see the inventory rather than the bells and whistles. The bells and whistles can all be uploaded into a map with Esri after the data is clean. So the data needs to be clean. And that's what I want to see first, because I look at that map and it's like, okay, that's the end product. I want to see a list of what exists where, what
Category.
yes. Yeah, and how many units are there?
then there's gonna be that gap, right, like, we know building permit for the city.
Right.
We know that,
Right.
we don't know Ellisville's. No
Right.
idea. That's another issue. But so we have that, and then we have the city plan commission
Right.
acting.
Right.
And there's a gap that's always gonna be there, right? So I think we go with the building permits, not the city plan commission.
Okay.
Because I think that's too hard to track.
Except that if you have these zombie huge developments. Because the plan commission has approved it and nobody has applied for a permit, then you've got a mismanaged and misplanned city.
I see what you're saying.
So you've
I
got to
see
go
what you're
off the
saying.
plan commission document.
Yeah, I guess,
Some of them go to council, so you would have.
well, but not all of them,
Final.
but not
So
all
I
of them.
went, so I
No, I
went,
know.
I
but I'm
went to
just
the
saying.
commissioners, because that's the final authority. If it got approved and it's approved at 371 or 92 units, that's what you use until it's changed. And if there's a variance, then you change it to,
Mhm.
373 units or 186 units from 97. But you have to do that. That's what I mean about the data has to be high quality. The picture is way less important. Yeah.
Why is the vacancy proprietary?
Because the owners are not required to give it. So unless this county made a requirement that they had to divulge and report once a year on their vacancy rate, they're not obliged to. It's proprietary. and it's marketing research, which is proprietary.
Try to put that back in mind, but I think there's something about needing a reason to have that information. I don't know how I think that's where we run into trouble.
Right.
So
Because it's not the same. Fire district, it's not the same, you know.
Yes, okay, exactly.
But I asked my list again.
But I could find out, you know, I. Pulling in and.
Yeah, but that's.
One
I
more
know.
thing, and just my last thing is I think we're kind of moving in a direction that we've never really seen kind of this type of goal of a housing inventory related to, you know, multiple jurisdictions, how they're developing and like, I think what Jackie's putting together is a great start. I think
That's
we
great.
all really have to move with like a very slow pace. And as she presents things, I feel like they'll continue to be refined and eventually we'll get a good product. So it's, you know, once we do that, the planning can keep up and then 10 years down the road, probably will be when like, oh, how were we able to conduct business without this information, without this tool? So my expectations are set to kind of look at this as a prototype as we move forward, refine it and try to improve the data. There's a lot of different ways to filter to the data to find like anomalies, inaccuracies, errors, whatever. But I don't expect a turnaround like anytime soon with a full encompassing of what's going on in the county. But if you think about how we can track that in 10 years from now, we are catching all that data, I think would be magnificent. And that's kind of where I think thoughts are around this matter. And I think that sets up a better trajectory and expectations for what type of housing stock inventory that you end up coming with, because everything we're talking about, and I know how messy the data is, I truly do. It's going to take a long time, but I think you're moving in a great direction, even willing to tackle this. I just really wanted to say that.
I would like to just say, I'm less interested in a product and more interested in the planning document inventory so that we know when somebody comes in and claims that there's a housing shortage, we can say exactly where is the housing shortage there? Do you realize that there are these PUDs that have been approved? Have you spoken with that builder? If you're interested, or that developer, if you're interested to build, there is a PUD that's approved that you can take advantage of. That way, we're good stewards of the land and of our resources.
you actually would not want to see building permit data so much because that would mean
What
that it would be like accounted for. Both, okay.
and I did both, you know, so there's a good head start. You know, there's a good head start and the city data is there. And I think it is a matter of urgency. And the product is not so important as the list.
Okay. I'll set
Well,
up.
if I may, I've listened to a lot of this. I know I'm remote today, so I mean I see these as stepwise in a project plan and not there's a lot of I'm hearing a lot of convolution of things, and so I want to maybe step back to say to just reiterate what I heard from the surveyor and others that have worked with Esri Solutions, that an Esri tool consumes CSV files and creates visualizations. So like, I don't know if we're talking past each other about product versus data, but the tool consumes Excel files to generate the visualization. So you get one and you get both for the price of one in the development of a good, clean data set. I heard the surveyor make a comment about how the data is a little dirty because obviously recorder data versus assessor data versus our data versus building permit data calls things different by different names and who owns what. And so I think getting just a standard columnar, like just like the requirement of what we call things, once that's calibrated, it doesn't matter what you display in the map, it will display the columns that you're creating in that space. I hope that makes sense to folks in the room, but I think we're fighting the technology jargon without maybe an Esri brief on how the tool works. Other than that, I mean, I agree with the surveyor's comment that we are delving into some kind of philosophical or kind of positional statements versus just getting the data. So from my seat, I just like to see the data, and then we can start making discussions about what that data does or supports or doesn't support as terms of policy. But that's my 2 cents on this today, other than to say I think this is a really good start, and anytime we can visualize data for easy consumption and dashboarding is useful to the public. Thanks.
Okay, anybody else with any comments or? Okay, we're moving on to, for discussion ZOA 25 for an amendment to the county development ordinance.
So this is an item for discussion. We do not have this going to the plan commission this month for the regular meeting. This is, I think the trajectory of this would be to go back to the ordinance review committee and get a little bit more detail into what the ordinance would contain. But we had a productive ordinance review committee meeting. We met on May 12th. Mr. Enright Randolph and Mr. Ferris were both present for that meeting. And we discussed the sliding scale 25-year reservation. So I provided a little bit of information, a little bit of the conversation that happened, and also kind of what came of that. So there were some discussions related to sliding scale about packaging plant versus septic versus sewer. Also, if we were to create more lots versus, you know, the number of lots we create now, would that require more public improvements? So we tried to hash that out into just a beginner red line version of the sliding scale subdivision. So at any point, if you have questions or if you want to talk through any of this, I would be happy to do so. So I'm going to start with the text amendment first, and then I will go back to some of the red line information. So this is specific to the sliding scale subdivision. What we discussed at the ordinance review committee was creating more than 4 lots in a rural area. So right now we have just between 9.10 acres to about 40 acres, we can create 4 lots. We do not have any other option other than a major subdivision in the county on septic that creates 10-acre lots. There's not a option in the county that exists for people that have large tracts of land to create smaller lots, such as 2.5-acre lot sizes. So we have in here a red text amendment regarding what the changes could be. We thought it might be helpful as staff to review these as a minor sliding scale, which would be kind of in keeping with the original text today, and then a major sliding scale, because after you get to 5 lots, you do have other related requirements in the ordinance. So if we don't have different criteria for those, we will then have to amend other parts of the ordinance. So we can talk through any number of those. So related to this, there was also a discussion about striking the 25-year reservation altogether. This was a tabled option or a tabled item from the CDO hearings. We all discussed it. We looked at the meeting minutes of when sliding scale was created, and it was discussed at the CDO work sessions that we will table this and talk about it after the CDO has passed. The CDO has passed, and now we're trying to come up with either a different number of years or what we would like to do with this. And the ordinance review committee wanted to start the discussion off with, what if we just removed it? So that is one of the discussion points that I want to talk about today. I also added in here the table that we reviewed different subdivisions by. So I do think that if we are considering creating 5 or more, 5 to 10 lots under the sliding scale option, that we need to start thinking about what public improvements would be required, different than just creating 4 lots. One of the things that we have in the ordinance currently is regarding the number of people that can access off of one driveway or one easement. It does require it to come up to public standards. So public county road standards. So that would be something that's tied in between different ordinances, different versions of the code. The highways code as well has some requirements. So this is something that's quite important. The distinction of 5 lots does kick it into question what other standards require. So I could go into some of these standards right now. The one that I want to mention specifically is in regard to the packaging plant. So if we were to add packaged sewage treatment plant as a text amendment here, The state code, I think, would recognize right now that packaging plants likely are under a sanitary sewer system because it's not a private sanitary sewer system. But if we were to add this to make it very clear to the public and then a definition for packaging plants, that's something that we could do under here, but you are opening up this type of subdivision to any large lot that has over, 100 acres, let's say, to creating 10 lots anywhere in the county. So that's, it does take a different approach for, trips per day that you're considering. So a lot, we think about road width and those considerations. And if every person along that way is doing it, that could add up to quite a bit of people. It takes into consideration fire, police services, schools. So it's just a bit more to think about, especially in the rural areas. So it's something that we want to discuss with you. So I think that's it for most of my introduction into this item, and I'm happy to go through some of the red and black text to go over what the ORC discussed, but I'm gonna ask.
I think
I just wanted to, because there was only two people at the ORC. Mr. Ferris wanted to move this along and I was supportive of doing that. At first, I was like, okay, maybe we should wait until we have a larger board, the four of us, to really discuss that. And what I'm really trying to do is just kind of let everyone get a sense of where I was. Like, if you go to page 9, I think, I was kind of thinking in context, how can we create some more relief based off of page 9 on
Relief
the
of-
actual thing. Relief from putting things into a moratorium or or allowing maybe 1 or 2 more lots. And I was like, well, maybe the size. And then as I'm talking about that, I'm like kind of walking it back at the same time, because it's like we don't want to build too much without having the right infrastructure. So like at some stages, it's like almost chasing your own tail to get it right. So, and then talked about the packaging plant, and it's like, I'm not too fond of the idea of allowing a lot of HOAs managing a packaging plant either. And then one other thing that kind of resonated with me real well was like the cluster subdivisions, like that could actually preserve these larger lots, which is some of our intent is like, we want to preserve these larger lots, but we only allow them to subdivide them in 10-acre slivers. That's not preserving a larger lot. That's creating a lot of large lots, in my opinion. But if we look at cluster subdivisions, then, like 20 of those acres could create those lots, but now we're preserving 80 acres. So, but just, I don't know if that really makes too much sense. Like I said, at one point I was kind of backtracking some of my comments and kind of felt like I was chasing my own tail, but that's kind of where my thoughts were along the discussion. And since we're here talking with everyone, I was really hoping to hear everyone else's. And this is pretty much all I really wanted to say before I just listened.
Yeah, you kind of mix apples and oranges here, and I don't advise doing that. The historical, this is after John Rogan passed away a couple weeks ago. Yeah, so I remember working with Richard Martin, John Rogan on this sliding scale, and it has a history that you have to understand before you even start saying, oh, it's too much, it's this way. So I'll be brief. First and foremost, I don't think people have an issue with sliding scale because they use it. The reason it came up over and over again in the ordinance CDO public listening sessions was because people didn't understand it. There was misinformation, probably purposefully issued, about what they are. And people thought every development, every subdivision has a 25-year moratorium on it, which is not true. And I think if we correct that record and make sure people know that, we can go back and say, now, really, what do you want to change about it? Because that's what I kept hearing. When I dig in and talk to people after their public comments, they'd say, yeah, but I just want to split my lot. It's like, well, you don't need to do a sliding scale. That's subdivision. You can do that. So people absolutely misunderstood what it is and how it's used. The goal is to prevent sprawl. You don't do that by creating a whole bunch of half-acre lots, and cram, 50 houses onto 100 acres and say, well, look, we've just done sliding scale. That's not the goal. The goal was for people who said to us years and years ago, I'm a farmer, I own this lot, I don't want to sell off in my entire property, I want 2 lots for my kids and a 3rd lot I want to sell so I can go on a trip in retirement. That's what we heard and that's what we responded to. This has all been lost in translation since that time. And it wasn't all that long ago because I'm old, but I'm not that old. So I want to start with that. Cluster subdivisions are different. We're not talking about that. Different. So I think the first thing we have to do is make sure people understand what a sliding scale is and what it's used for. Why we went to that, why it was selected as a method of a different type of development for people who have 100 acres, 40 acres, and they don't want to sell everything off. They want to preserve most of it and, put their kids there or whatever it might be. That was the whole reason for sliding scale. You don't have to use it. You don't have to use it. That misinformation went out and it's been embedded. And I want to break that myth. No,
How do we do that? How do we do that?
I don't know. I'm gonna get a billboard. So,
There's the context of the city now studying sewer and how a lot of these are conditioned to sewer. So when you kind of bake that into that, my talking points aren't so abstract. Like
I don't want to talk about cluster subdivisions and then talk about sliding scale. They're different things.
no, I said that resonated with me. That was one
Okay.
thing that
The
resonated.
reason sewer doesn't is because these are out in the county. We don't have a lot of 80, 140 acre lots right next to the city where sewer is accessible. If we did, then the city should be providing sewer service. Yes, if you could do a package plant with 3 homes, it's very expensive to do for 3 homes. I'm not sure that that's an option. I don't have any issue with package plants. I don't. They don't work everywhere. We found that out. I thought you could do one anywhere. Apparently you can't. We learned that this last couple of years. So anyway, I'm not taking, I think these are 3 separate discussions. Package plants, cluster subdivisions, sliding scale. And they overlap in the Venn diagram of life, they overlap, but I don't want to have those if you want to talk about package plants, whether they're viable, let's have that discussion separately. Then let's have that discussion about sliding scale. And where those 2 overlap, yes, we'll talk about that. But I don't, by throwing all this stuff at it, it's made it very confusing and it's not.
Yes.
I'll leave it at that.
Colonel Ferris?
Wow.
Sorry, I'm just kind of.
I agree with what you just said with respect to sliding scale. So what is the premise for a sliding scale? Why do we have that as a classification?
So the sliding scale allows people to create a 2.5 acre lot size and a larger majority of the lot as the parent parcel. The other subdivision type, which is common in the rural areas, is a minor subdivision, which has a minimum, each lot has to be 10 acres.
So where is the confusion? That people don't understand because they're using the wrong classification. Where is the confusion?
Well, I think that one of the confusion points is in the table 4831, right? So and just correct me if I'm wrong, because I'll play dumb here to get the argument, where it needs to be then. If I'm looking at something that says I've got 9.99 acres or less, and I also know that I've got a 2.5 acre minimum in the county, I mean, wouldn't someone look at that reasonably and say, well, gosh, is that 4? Can I divide into 4 parcels? Or can I do 55% and then 2 on that, right? Because I mean, I could look at that and say, why can't that be 4 2.5 acre units? on the sliding scale, and yet the column is saying, no, it's only one.
It wouldn't be sliding scale. That would be a subdivision.
Okay, so you can just see, like, I'm just playing devil's advocate here and how someone could walk in and say, I'm just doing math, is it so if we're saying that's subdivision, then that's where a clarity point needs to be, right? Because that's confusing. And maybe it's not confusing to people who've been at it a while, but I think someone looking at just that grid for 5 minutes can get confused by that.
What I'm trying to do, David, is to,
Yeah.
where is the confusion?
Yeah, well, there's a confusion point, so
If we can take and figure out where the confusion is, then let's focus on addressing the confusion. Okay, so where's the confusion?
We get it from a few different angles. So some people don't know if they're able to do anything with the parent parcel. They think it's different. They think of it as like, is it a conservation lot? Do I get to build a house on it? What am I limited to doing on this lot? So there's some confusion that we get from people from that. And then also when people do subdivide and create a parent parcel of that 25-year, I think the confusion is that we don't want to wait 25 years. We want to hurry up and re-subdivide it again. And so our goal, I think, in this CDO is that we close the loop to say, you can't partially vacate and keep doing this, keep doing this, keep doing this. Because people would do a minor subdivision, create a 12-acre lot and a 12-acre lot, vacate the first minor, do 2 sliding scales, vacate the second minor, do 2 sliding scales. And we thought, well, why didn't we just do a 4 lot? It's just like, we just would like to see an option or discussion with people to say, you just can't do that regardless of how many acres you have.
Yep.
And then I think that people aren't sure what purpose the 25 years serves. I know we talked about that during the CDO. What's going to happen in 25 years that you don't know today, or what can I do? Why 25?
It was a generational thing. And again, this is about sprawl and preventing big 80-acre, 100-acre lots from being subdivided to hell out in, like way out in the edge of the county, and then expecting roads and services and intersections to be able to afford to serve folks the way they expect to be served. We can't afford that. We don't have the money for that. But within 25 years, we may, and at that point, it may become feasible. Something else changes, the road changes, whatever it might, business move, whatever it might be. So it was a generational number. If y'all want to make that generational number 20 years, that's fine. But it represents a generation, because then that family may want to subdivide another piece off of that 100 acres for 2 kids that have now come into being, right? That's why it was a generational number, but also because within that time frame, you have a new road planning map, you have,
That's right.
those kinds of
Those tend to go on.
big,
25
yes,
years.
yeah, exactly. And between that economic regional development, road planning, and a generation of a family who may want to again cut off small pieces of this large acreage farm, for example, they could then do that, no problem, and do the same process again if it still exists. But again, the goal is to preserve the green space, the agricultural, which is it's part of our economy, which people seem to forget about. They just think it's, something to be developed into housing. Ag is our economy too. So that was the goal.
So I have a question on that. So there was a transcript provided in the packet tonight. What was the date of that transcript? I didn't see it in when did that transcript occur? When did that meeting occur?
Was that the last ORC meeting in May?
No, this was Scott Wells, and people aren't here anymore. That large transcript. This
Transcript
is
was from the CDO hearings, yes, and it's from 2014.
okay. So that's the 2014 transcript of some of what we
1206.
just heard, referring back to the 1996 creation of the if I'm reading this right, the original ideas behind the moratorium. So if I take that generational argument, my challenge is that as I read that transcript, like there were comments made about the urbanizing area and focusing on planning out the county, the 2012 comp plan. And, if we put some time now between 2014 and now, 11 years, the only way that works for me, Commissioner, is if we actually were going about the plan for building out that infrastructure. So like so it's sort of like saying, well, we don't have the resource now and we're going to do this work to plan for it. And then if we don't do it for a decade and then we come back to it and say, well, gosh, we don't have the resource and we didn't really do the work to start building out the infrastructure. I think, I mean, the challenge here is that 25 years is a little too long then. Because it feels like a bit of a circular argument for folks. I can appreciate why they'd be frustrated. I mean, if we're building out and building against a plan for the community that says, yeah, we are working on road extensions and bridge improvements, and we have a highway department that's rated every road in the county that we've been replacing over the past few years, like we should be able to make a comment or a claim that we're getting to a point where we could entertain folks subdividing or doing the subdivisions there. So I'm trying to wrap my head around that transcript from years ago and kind of where we are now. And what I need, I guess, is data to back up what I'm hearing. Where's the data on, the half acre subdivisions with 100 houses, in the rural space? Like, is that I mean, have we even seen a proposal like that in a quarter century? Have we stalled that? So I guess in just voicing this in the admin meeting today, like I'd like to see some data points that hold up as to whether or not the original idea of the 25-year moratorium from 2014 has actually come true, or if some of this was, concerns, but there's no data to really back up the concerns of what what development would look like in these spaces. I don't know if that makes sense to others in the room, but it's one thing to hypothesize about what the worst possible development could be if we didn't have this in place, as opposed to finding the middle ground on some of these opportunities to improve the lots that we can improve and also retain for agriculture and protect the things we're trying to. But I just throw that into the room because I just don't feel like I've got the data to back up the claims that I'm hearing on some of that.
Thank you. First Commissioner Thomas, then Colonel Paris, and then Mr. Ullman.
Yeah, so, if somebody wants to subdivide, 40 acres into whatever they can subdivide it into, they can make that proposal. You are replicating the myth by saying this is the only way to make a subdivision. It is not. A farmer who wants to keep.
It's not a binary. I'm not offering a binary here. I'm just.
I'm sorry, Mr. Henry, but Commissioner Thomas is.
I am not saying it's a binary. What I'm saying is there are multiple options for development. The problem is to actually afford to put in wider roadways and intersections and the lights and the utilities and everything else that goes into it way out on the edge of the county is very expensive. It is not something I imagine any county council will ever support, because it is an expense to feed one subdivision potentially. Now, if somebody wants to propose a PUD, if somebody wants to propose a subdivision, a minor, a major, they can do that. This is one option that helps us prevent sprawl. Sprawl is a real thing. I don't know how to prove it to you statistically, but sprawl is real. And I am not in the business of trying to counter argue. I need data with, here's data from whatever communities. We try to discourage sprawl because it is an expense that the whole county bears. And it's not fair to the residents of the county who already are here to have to pay for what looks like Bargersville. You want to see sprawl, go to Bargersville. Take a look at how lovely that looks.
I'm sorry, Mr. Henry. Colonel Paris is next to
That's fine.
recognize, and then Mr. Ullman. Thank
ahead.
you.
Item out.
Thank you. Colonel Paris?
Trying to lower the temperature just a little.
Yeah.
I just have a very basic question, and I'm sure others probably do as well. I've got 100 acres, and I'm a farmer. And when does the 25 years begin?
At the time of recording.
Okay, who's recording? The farmer? I've owned the property for 50 years, so 25 years ago, does the moratorium expire?
No, at the time of recording the subdivision, the sliding scale subdivision.
So he has a kid.
Yeah, the carve out.
Okay, and so I've got 100 acres and I'm gonna carve something out for my kids.
Right.
Okay, at that point in time,
25-year clocks.
it's gonna be 25 years from that point in time.
So we're only at 10 years.
Pushback, folks. And there's a lot of pushback.
But there are other options.
I heard what you said, and I don't
I
say.
mean, I don't get why everybody's so fixated on this because it's like the only thing you could do. It is not.
And
And
so how do we make sure people understand there's options?
Right, so there's the other option on a septic system as a minor for 10-acre lots. I think it's one of the things we discussed, and we have heard in the office is that some people cannot get a loan for 10 acres, so they have to go with the sliding scale option. So it does kind of, if people come in, their number one goal is how do I create the smallest lots and preserve or retain the larger lots? It is an ideal option. People want to have 2.5 acres or smaller in the county. And so 2.5 is what we have as the smallest. And so we walk them through the sliding scale process. So people.
I mean, I know what I'm going to do if a person who's 100 acres comes to me and say, what the heck do we do? I'm gonna say, call Jackie. And have Jackie explain what the various options are for up to take. That's what I'm going to do.
Our planners all do that.
Yeah.
I know you do. I know you do.
Ask him to ask to do the planner of the day.
yeah, that's the planner of the day.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Sliding scale, you can create up to 4 lots. Minors, you can create up to 4 lots. A major subdivision, you could create, in your example, 10 lots. But you would probably not have exactly 10. Each lot would have to be 10 acres. You'd have to carve out some space for bioretention or some sort of stormwater, and then roads, and then. some
So I
probably-
appreciate your response and your
Yeah.
answer, explanation, but that's not what the plan. It's a process.
Sure,
It's
any subdivision has a process.
It's a process.
Yeah.
And so can we change 25 years to something different? And define urban sprawl by something
I don't,
else?
let's talk about it at ORC.
We did.
Well, I wasn't there. I'm sorry. I will be there next week.
Mr. Ullman, you.
So if I have, using the 100 acres example, 10 years ago, I carved out two 2-acre parcels in the corner, and now I have, 100 minus 4, I have 96 acres left, and it's locked up. I did that 10 years ago, so it still has 15 more years. But now I want to carve out another 2-acre parcel right next to the other 4-acre, the other 2-acre parcels. What is the option for that?
So,
Can you do that on septic?
well, there, you could potentially do a preliminary plat amendment if you didn't first hit that allocation of 4 lots. There is a little bit of confusion there, I think, but we do have an ability to get up to the 4 lots total. But even if, in your example, 100 acres, even if you create another lot, so you have now 4 lots total, you would still have, in your example, I guess 92 acres that would still be on hold, and then you'd be replatting it. So I think the 25 years would start again.
So that 25 would start again, but I can pull that 2 acres out, even though I'm locked up with 15 years still left to go in the current parcel.
I think that the wording of it says designated parent parcel remainder shall not be further subdivided for a period of 25 years from the date of recording of the secondary plat unless connected to sanitary sewage or further subdivision of the property is authorized by ordinance.
Which would be a PUD, for
So-
example.
If you, and we do see a few people, I think I had statistics in the ORC packet, but we do see some people that only create like 2 or 3 lots and they could create up to 4.
Yeah.
So the math kind of works out better if people will do the 4 up front, 55% and everything else.
Because one of the scenarios, going back to when we were going through all these meetings, one of the scenarios I received a lot from a lot of the farmers that I work with, and plays right into the examples that was brought up about why this was originally put in, was so that, farmers could carve off a few acres for their kids or whatever. And is that, so, grandpa didn't have the forethought to think about that 25-year lockup. And so what he did was he took his 100 acres and he carved out 2 acres here for his house, 2 acres here for his farm shop, and then the remaining 96 acres was all his ag fields. And he did that for tax purposes or whatever, putting it in a trust, whatever reason he did that, but he did that 10 years ago. And now the son wants to break it up, but he can't do that. And then beyond that, now So let's say I wait 15 years, well, at that point, grandson is gonna be already 20 years old, and now we're gonna restart that 25-year clock again. And so I truly understand the 25-year being a generational thing, but one of the biggest arguments that I received from people on that 25-year thing was, okay, does that generational time make sense in terms of actual like application of a generation? And I like the idea that you threw out about dropping it to 20 years, or even more than that, because, you know, like, let's say my dad owns that 100 acres. Am I in a position right now at the age of 30 to carve out, you know, can I afford that? Might not be in a position to buy that, but I might be 10 years from now. And so if we don't carve it now, you know, so it's like that clock, you're playing this time game. And I almost would like to know if there is a way that we can figure up, and I know this is like trying to find statistics that maybe don't exist, but what is the inflection point between if that parent parcel is locked up for 5 years, a developer might come back in 5 years and try to do it again. But if it's locked up for 25 years, the developer loses interest. But if it's 25 years, it's too much for a family. So where's the inflection point between those two where a developer is going to lose interest, but we're not burdening the family, we're not smacking the family? And can we find that inflection point? Is it 15 years? Is it 10 years? Can we?
Come in and do a PUD. I mean, it's not holding it up because it says except for ordinance. The developer could come in and do a PUD, planned unit development. So it's not as though they're prohibited from that. If the developer's got money, they're 92 acres sitting there. Well, he needs to talk to Jackie and to Julie and to the plan commission and put a proposal down for
So
a subdivision.
I guess then. Okay. I guess I don't see a family subdividing or a group subdividing as being the leading direction to sprawl. And I understand the importance of avoiding sprawl, but I think that it's more the developer route. And it's like, if we have the PUD option, then we're not really, like, we have the opportunity to shut down the PUD to avoid the sprawl. And instead we're locking up vast tracts of land for, in my opinion, way too long.
Yeah, I mean, that's valid, and the issue of the length of time is on the table. But if the developer notion is really not an issue because it's contained in the ordinance that if the developer wants to develop that 92 acres, the 25 years doesn't get in the
Okay.
way.
Well, then let's avoid the developer term, but just the general body, whoever the person is that we're avoiding by putting this 25 years in place in the fourth point. If it's just sprawl in general, where's because if, you know, 25 years is what is keeping sprawl from happening, what's saying that 20 years won't keep sprawl from happening? What's saying that 10 years won't keep sprawl from happening? So let's lower that to
2 weeks.
okay, let's do 2 weeks. There we go. She just offered to do 2 weeks, so let's put 2 weeks.
That's called sarcasm. So, but I have a question for you, just a point of clarification. I don't, from what you said, and that's why I'm jumping in here. What do you mean by locking the land up?
Because we just, we just said that if he's already hit his four lots, now that unit is locked for 25 years
For resub.
for re-subdividing it. Unless he's on sewer. And how many of these, if it was 100 years, you know, your comment was about how this was first in place in particular for farm land and ag land and that commodity, and allowing these families that have been farming this land for generations to keep their future generations on their land. But, you know, I don't think that they're in a position that they're just going to want to just subdivide it to heck. But if they've already spent the time subdividing it and they didn't have the forethought to start that clock far enough in advance, and now they're locked up for another 15 years, but they still want to lock up, that land is not in a position where they can put in septic. That, you know, most of the time they're far off from a septic or a sewer septic, apologize. They're far from the sewer limits. So that's where I'm like in this position where you have these lands that are locked, but the landowner should still have the opportunity to allow their family to live on the land they've owned for how many hundreds of years.
Okay, Tron and then David Henry.
I agree with that sentiment 100%. Unfortunately, it's not always what occurs when you're talking about, people selling off property for profit. They hit hard times. One thing we keep referring to is other processes. So it'd be real nice to understand kind of like how those processes fit without having sewer. We have one of the footnotes that are pretty much associated to all of the subdivisions. Like if you don't have access to septic, the minimum lot size of a subdivision is 10 acres.
You don't have access to.
Sewer, sorry. I'm reading it. Also, I'd like to say that, I was in support of moving this forward. I never thought it was a done deal. And a lot of these conversations weren't an impetus from me trying to write Randolph. So like, let's make sure when we're targeting our comments, we don't make them feel personal. It comes from the sarcasm, the belittleness of like comments back and forth. I feel abruptly, somewhat subjective towards everyone's, dissent to the discussion of different ideas when it wasn't me that really wanted to push this conversation forward right now, but I was fine because I want to hear from other people.
We all feel the same way.
Margaret, Tron has the floor right now.
I know,
No, Tron has the floor right now. Hey, no, Tron has the floor. Tron.
I'm the chair.
Okay, you can't interrupt them and then you be the interrupter. No, that's not, you can't play the cards that way.
So it's this, the big septic thing is.
Would
the
you
big
like to
issue.
chair? I'll chair it.
I don't want you to chair.
I didn't want you
It's
to
a-
chair either.
It's a big
I know.
issue and we need to understand that in relation to the sliding scale. And when we say there's other options, there's a PUD that's been mentioned. That has to be approved. There's no predictability. What I would like is just a few bits of adjustments to our ordinance that gives predictability to a farmer that owns some land that might want to give it to his family or sell it off for some interest, maybe a future buyer that, wants to take an investment in our community that knows when they do that, there's going to be some predictability with their investment. Now, like I said, I was walking back some of my comments because it does get complex. But what we have right now is a lack of addressing the issue with septic and sewer. And so it's just making every bit of land, in my opinion, in the county, a finite commodity versus an opportunity. And that's generally how I feel right now, because we're not addressing some of the issues that are present in our community and our county. And that's with not having sewer and having all these ideas that you can do 1,000 different things, but those are contingent to having sewer. And until we address that, and I mentioned that, and that's why it's part of our discussion, I feel like this conversation could go on the back burner because Jackie brought it up. If packaging plants are recognized as a sewer, then 100 acres adjacent to it could just subdivide it. And then we're going to see urban sprawl. That's kind of my feelings around this. I'm not sold on anything except for the fact that like we need more predictability. We can't just chalk it up that they can come and ask and we can say yes.
Whoever wants to speak.
I know David has had to work out for a while.
I had said he would speak.
Good, David.
You have the floor, Dave.
Thank you. Just maybe some other thoughts here. So I want to appreciate Mr. Ullman's comment about what seems to be the 25-year number seeming in the way you described it and the way I'm reading it in these transcripts and the way it evolved. We can call it a generation. It is a bit arbitrary. It's looking at other counties in terms of what they would call a moratorium or suspense or pause. The number is quite large, and I think you identified some case study or straw man type examples where, somebody that's not a developer would want to use their generational land in a way that makes sense for their family. So I think where I would like to focus my comments on how I would get to a place where I can understand where we're going with this is we're not operating on the same terms. We've heard straw man personas, which, where we've defined the hypothetical farmer with a lot that wants to subdivide for children and grandchildren. I mean, that's a hypothetical. We've also defined a hypothetical of a speculator that has bought large parcels of property without maybe regard to our local ordinance. But all that is, those are kind of personas or straw men that we're bouncing ideas off of, and they're not data driven. And so when I hear comments, and I appreciate, folks are like, hey, David, where would you like us to get said data? The data is right here. I mean, we just saw a presentation of a data visualization of things that we're doing in this department. Tron, I know we've looked at survey data of who owns the county together as a visualization in Esri, and I don't think it would take long for us to come to a conclusion on what parcels would be problematic, that we would want to see that type of protection on, and others that might be ripe for subdivision because they are in a place that could sustain packaging or could sustain a clustered subdivision. But we need the data on what's available in the county to look at. So I say all that to say, I would like to get away from sort of the kind of straw person like examples of what we're talking about and actually look at the actual parcels and cases that we have that could fit what we're really talking about here. Because it just doesn't, I'm not responsive to the kind of hypothetical farmer scenario at this point, because I'm not sure how many of those there really are compared to somebody that maybe inherited property in the county and doesn't really know what to do with it other than they'd like to subdivide it and maybe put 2 or 3 units on it and what that means. And I guess my last comment would be, we just need to define terms. I mean, we can't throw around terms like urban sprawl without definition. I mean, those are, if they are well defined enough that we all can agree on what that term means, fine. But again, I don't want to keep reaching for binaries in this discussion. I lastly just want to say my piece that I appreciate Mr. Ullman's comment. I know I'm on a hybrid format tonight, but we either are going to follow procedure or we're not. If I'm going to be cut off in discussion, but others are allowed to engage in a free-for-all discussion around a topic that's maybe not as hot, if we need to pull out a parliamentarian or get the Roberts rules out to get through tougher conversations, I'm okay with that to maintain decorum. But we just had, I mean, I was trampled on, others were allowed to talk freely without being put back in the pecking order. I just need to say that, and we need to work on the consistency of how we're going to apply our procedures so we can conduct our business together. Thank you.
I have a motion. I suggest that we take COA 25-3 table it, and we continue this discussion back at the ORC.
Well, you had already said this wasn't for this month's plan commission
I know,
meeting
We
anyway.
need to put it back to the ORC.
Yeah, I think the ORC.
We're not ready to do this. There's too
I'm
much.
not sure we need a motion for that. but
Okay.
That was
I'm
my
just saying
point.
that there's too much emotion. That's right. We need to take lower. You all agree with that? Disagree with that? Ready to take a vote on it?
We don't need to vote.
Okay, need to vote.
Can I ask, Mr. Henry a question? I'm curious on your comment about you want more like tangible data rather than just you use the term straw man. I'm not too familiar with that term, but are you asking that you'd like to see, how many of these parcels that are in a 25-year or existing in that moratorium exist? Or I guess I'm curious on
Yeah.
what that tangible data looks like, because I think it would be very beneficial. I'd like to see that too, but I'm not sure what that tangible data looks like.
So I mean, I'll be quick about it because I know we're deep into the meeting. So imagine like we did with the impermeable surface a few weeks ago, where we were able to tease out some parcels to look at and see what those look like by percentages and the like, right? So some of those we were able to look at visuals, look at some data and say, okay, here's an example of a parcel that fits what we're talking about. We've had examples while I've even been on Plan Commission of people have come to us to subdivide under the current and talk through that. We can take a look at some of those some of those cases that have been brought into the docket recently that either really well fit what we're talking about or were really hard to deal with because of some of the variables that prevented that parcel owner from getting to maybe a common sense solution in some of the ways that you described, that the sort of generational pass down of the grandkids, right? So I think that we've got it in what we've done. We just need to kind of compile the cases and look at them so we can better understand what we're talking about, other than these kind of appeals to, and when straw man meaning, the logical fallacy of just a created idea that fits our argument, really. That's what I was saying there, that, we're, rather than creating a hypothetical farmer, let's actually find a few and parcels that we've dealt with recently that either were well matched for this or were really hard to deal with because of some of the things we talked about. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Yeah.
If I can turn my question then expand it to Jackie, how feasible is that to collaborate, 5 or half dozen or so properties that are existing in, and it'd be nice if they were in a gradient of, hey, this one just went into the 25, this one's at 10-year, this one's at 5-year, if that's feasible
Once it comes back to the planning commission.
for more conversation. Yeah, that'd be nice. Thank you.
I will want to add that you're always welcome to, can't attend an ORC meeting all the time, but those packets are published and the recordings are in the calendar.
Yep.
And you can always go back and look at those, because sometimes I think we are putting some examples in the ORC packet that don't get to hear all the time.
I have a question. Dave,
Yes.
since we've lost our chair and our vice chair, at this point in time, what are the rules about who runs the meeting?
Well, I think at this point you could appoint somebody to chair the meeting, or you could turn that over to the staff to take over.
I recommend the staff take it over at this point. We don't have any.
That works for me, yeah.
Sorry, staff.
It's very easy from here on out. If we're moving on to the next items, unfinished business, and then we have one new business because the second item was continued. So Tammy, I think you can briefly give an update on the unfinished business together.
For Holland Fields, there is a meeting planned for June 10th.
That's it.
That's the update. That's it. We're gonna get the.
We're still waiting on the info.
Got it. That's. Nothing has changed. And then the next item, North Park 2 PUD development plan, that is gonna go to plan commission this month. We've seen this quite a few times as part of it is part of the rezone, which already went through. But this is a request for final development plan allowance to permit the fill site on the retired or old quarry site. So that one's pretty much ready to go. It's been drainage board and we're ready to bring it to you all for a vote. And then we would proceed with the development plan approval and permits being issued on that.
And I back up to the Holland Fields one and just out of curiosity, and because there was a lot of moving parts, a lot of different bodies involved.
Right.
Am I allowed to ask who all is at said meeting in terms of, were you able to get everybody scheduled for this meeting, or there's one builder?
3 lot, their attorney will be out. Unfortunately, we just found that out today. And they asked us to go through someone associated with the developer, maybe attend. But the attorney is, but the attorney is willing to meet with us when they get back in town.
Okay, so that 3-1 is the allowed, not asked. Okay, just curious.
So that's happening before.
It'll happen before plan commission, but possibly not for the packet. So we'll give it up the meeting. That was it as far as business coming at the next plan commission meeting. So does anyone have any questions for us? Okay. All right.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
I actually had something on the North Park. Is that the North Park one on screen right now, Jackie?
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, we didn't have the chance to hear from petitioners. I mean, do we know, I guess, have they been in contact with us since some of those votes or not?
You're talking about Holland Fields or North Park? Sorry.
North Park. Yeah, I got it away from me because I know we took they weren't in the room when we talked about it. Of course, we were all supportive because, but have they reached out since the last meeting at all?
They were supportive of the, if you're talking about the rezone portion
Yeah.
where it was like written commitments, they did reach out and they're okay with that.
Okay.
Yeah, but this one is the development plan. So these conditions are pretty much already met. I think they've already met the updated Karst Conservancy area to 50 feet. And they already have a stormwater grading permit in process. So they will be able to, the written commitment requires like quarterly water testing and things like that, just to confirm that the clean fill is clean. So they will have some requirements to keep on after they've started the grading work, just to monitor through a third party. Yeah, they don't have any issues with these, I should say. Did you have any other questions, David? Okay, all right. Okay, I think there was a motion to adjourn. If anyone doesn't have any.